4th day of Iyar, the 25th day of May. Today's class graciously dedicated Le'ilui Nishmat, Mr. Charlie Saka Yeshaya Ben Lora Alav Shalom, and as well as for the Refuah Shelema of Moshe Ben Mazal, graciously sponsored by Mr. A.B. Franco and family. Today, Be'ezat Hashem, we continue discussing the fundamental messages of this day's Sefirot, as we started to learn in the earlier part of this week. This week, Yosef Sadiq is the host of this fifth week of the Sefirat Omer, welcoming today Moshe Rabbeinu. As we learned in the past, Moshe Rabbeinu represents the midah known as Nesach. Nesach has two basic interpretations. Number one, eternity. Number two, victory. And in a way, if we think for a few moments, Yosef Sadiq in Egypt was victorious against the challenges that he experienced as a young man in Egypt, especially in his younger years. So therefore, it says as follows, that the Sefirah of today says that a person does have the potential to become successful in their spiritual life. I believe that we all agree to that. Every one of us has a potential. Some people know that they have a potential. Some people perhaps don't believe that they have a potential, and that's in a way is a bit challenging, because if a person does not have a certain level of belief in themselves or self-esteem, that also affects the life of the person. But interesting enough, the message of the Sefirah of today brings here a key statement that a person must activate in their day-to-day life. And I read you the language, Yesh lehargil et atzmo be'emunah peshuta. Interesting. It says, you want to become successful in your life? You want to be victorious in your life? You want to be spiritually growing and developing your potential, my potential? Obviously, I can only do it for myself, in the sense of each person has their own level of potential. But overall, we all can grow. So here it says something very simple to exercise. And it says, train yourself to have emunah peshuta in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's fascinating that it uses the word emunah peshuta. What does it mean, emunah peshuta? Doesn't mean only simple emunah, but it means basic emunah, which is basically something that we have learned through the years, how the gift and the power of emunah does give the person the potential and the power, I rather say, to overcome adverse situations in life. It goes even further, and it says, why do you think that we experience spiritual tests in our life? So here it says that what does it mean to have emunah peshuta? What does it mean to have emunah peshuta? So it says, I'm going to translate word by word. Iten miyad el libo. Put this thought in your heart. Ki aborei barach, that the Almighty Creator of the world, hu levado, He himself, asa, did, ose, will do, mehila, ose, does, veyase, and he will do, lechol hamaasim, in every and any matter related to us. Be'alken, and therefore it says the Sefirah of today, who Hashem is the one that sends the Yeser to pay us a visit. For what purpose? Kedei lehatibo be'acharito, in order to get a spiritual promotion in life. And it goes further. Behu, and he is the one that gives the person the power to overcome the nisayon and to continue further. Which is a very interesting, because if we think for a moment, there is a pasuk in the book of Habakkuk that says, Sadiq be'emunato ihyeh. The righteous lives with emunah. So what is Habakkuk and Navi is telling us? That in a way, a person that wants to develop godliness in their life, emunah, it's a requirement. And it is true. It is true. Emunah is one of the most fundamental aspects in the life of the person. How better our life becomes when we activate emunah, and we don't just say coincidence or it just happened. Obviously, not every situation has a happy moment, but sometimes comes even with challenges. But it seems to imply here in the Sefirah of today that if we understand that even the challenges originate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is obvious based on what we are learning now, so then when the challenges pay us a visit, perhaps, and this is maybe easier said than done, perhaps we will have better mechanism or defense mechanism to overcome them. Are we going to be always victorious and successful? Are we going to defeat the Yeser Hara in the first round? I hope that will be so easy. But it seems to imply the Sefirah of today that if the person makes the effort, and the Gemara already said this in the past, there are three statements from the Talmud that perhaps can relate to what we are learning today. One statement says, Havale itaher mesayein lo. A person that wants to get closer to Hashem, Shamayim gives the person a hand. Havali tameh, who wants to do the opposite, instead of the person wanting to get close to Hashem, the person wants to keep a distance. The Gemara says, Mesayein lo. Mehila, potchim lo. Shamayim says, Faddal. You have freedom of choice. You can make a right, you can make a left. You decide. Whatever you deal with in the future, it's the consequence of today's action. And the third one says, Baderech she'adam rotze lalechet, molichin oto. In the pathway that a person wants to go through, this is how Shamayim traces the pathway of the person. What does that mean? I think that this third statement from the Talmud means to say that if a person wants to do better, the opportunities are there. If a person wants to get stuck in their ways without moving anywhere north, south, east, west, also faddal. You know, is a people that belong to the same knis, to the same congregation, to the same synagogue, to the same communities. You see that some people grow and flourish, and some people are basically stuck for the past 20, 30 years. So you may ask yourself, what happened? They all went to the same shul. I think that the Gemara's answer gives us a hint. One person was wanting to grow and wanting to do better, and the other person just settled in their spiritual life. And therefore it says that in the moment of Mehila, a person who wants to truly grow in their spirituality, consistency, it's a requirement. What does it mean? I think that this is brought down in the Pele Yoes on the topic of ishtadlut, which means making an effort, that making efforts in life, it's essential for anything. Like I'm recording the class from the car. As you can see, I'm still in New York. I found a more quieter place than yesterday and the day before. Okay? I could have said, for example, you know what? I'm not in my settings in Florida. And I'm saying this with a lot of love and humility simultaneously. But then I say to myself, so what? Find a quiet place, make sure we have a Wi-Fi reception, and do the class. And Baruch Hashem, I try to do that to the best of my ability. Sometimes, for reasons beyond my control, I can't. But at least we are in the same time zone, and it's able to be done. But if for some reason I wouldn't give it, you would understand. Or let's move in something more common. A person wants to grow spiritually. And one of the things that we learned in the past was that even when it comes to spiritual growth, it has to be done with sechel. What does it mean? In an intelligent manner. One step at a time. Have a rabbi or a mentor help us grow one step at a time. And that's why the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot writes clearly, Aseh lecha Rav. Make yourself a rabbi to guide you, to help you, to advise you, to help you grow, or perhaps sometimes to stop. I've done it in the past. I met people that were flying, and I told them, you're doing it too fast. One step at a time, nobody's pressuring you. Just do baby steps like a child. A child is born, doesn't talk, doesn't walk, but as the weeks and months go by, things started to develop. And Be'ezat Hashem, the child reaches certain age that is mobile and is able to speak and is able to move, etc. Same thing in spirituality. But the Pele Yoes also writes, and it says, Hergel, a person that starts training on something, Naasa Teva. It becomes second nature to the person. And this is connected to praying with the minyan, getting up early in the morning, coming to learn to the knis, and whatever other area in life, even in the world of business. If a person trains themselves, they wake up, they have a seder, they have a certain order of the day, and they are trained internally, mentally, physically, emotionally, sooner the person will realize that a person automatic body, the body will go into auto mode. Wakes up, gets ready to go to shul, learns, prays and learns, breakfast, then goes to work. So you have a seder that becomes part of the personality of the person. And that's why it says here that a moment that the person starts developing in a good way the consistency in the godly behavior, the person, just with their actions, can also influence someone to get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I believe that we all see this through life. We know a lot of people, Baruch Hashem, and we have seen how certain people do take this matter into their heart, and they look for ways of how to strengthen their godly relationship, and they look back 10 years back, and they see the positive improvements that they made, but it also they saw a great benefit in the education of the children, in their shalom bayit, in who the children are friends with, and who their children did marry or will eventually marry. Meaning to say that a decision that someone, or a baby step that someone took 10 years ago, for example, 10 years later, you are seeing the dividends. And sometimes doesn't take 10 years. Sometimes could take 5 years. The number is irrelevant. The message is that a person needs to understand that positive changes that we do today will have a great domino effect overall in our life, individually and collectively as well. Additionally, he reinforces today the Gemara in Shabbat. We know the famous Gemara in the second chapter of Shabbat that brings the questions that a person will be asked after 120. And the language of the Gemara is Nasata benatata ve'emunah. Now, if we translate this Gemara literally, the first answer that most of us will give will be Nasata benatata. That means, did you dealt in business? Be'emunah. Masau matan is business transaction. So the Gemara asks, were you honest in business? Which is a fundamental question, even before Torah learning. Because the next question is, okay, thank you. Did you set up time to learn Torah? Yani, you want to move to second base? You have to go for first base first. And if you don't make it to first base, you're going to be striked out. So what the Gemara is trying to tell us, that even though the person learns Torah and may learn Torah, if the first step of Emunah, trustworthiness, and conducting business in a faithful manner is not approved, so to speak, or the person separated, like unfortunately some people think Torah is Torah, business is business. Synagogue is synagogue, business is business. With all due respect to anyone in the audience who feels this way, I respectfully, we need to agree to disagree. Because the Torah, and we have learned in the past at length often, that we cannot separate both aspects of life. As we learned yesterday, that our mission is to take the physicality of life and to upgrade it to become something spiritual. Same thing with business. How many misvot are found in business-related matters? Even last week's Torah portion, Lo tonu ish et amito. Don't hurt your friend. And twice is written in the same parasha. One is financial hurting and one is verbal. The verbal we spoke, the financial hurting, it's a given. And that's why the first question the Gemara asks, honesty in business. And it goes further and it says that the life of the person needs to develop in the life surrounded by Emunah. And this is something that the Rambam writes in a powerful way, and even writes that ladies, in a beautiful statement, and children often demonstrate a pure, holy, well-rounded aspects of Emunah in Hashem. We're not saying that men and adults don't have it, but it seems that this is something that perhaps we can thank Miriam HaNeviah, the sister of Moshe and Aharon. Remember, when we left Egypt, the Pasuk writes that Miriam HaNeviah took with her tambourines and all musical instruments, Batetzena kol hanashim achareha, and all the ladies of the Jewish people started to follow Miriam, playing the musical instruments, and they were praising Hashem. I ask you a question. We have seen the unfortunate situation in the Ukraine, I don't know for how many weeks already. And if you remember the first few days of the war, or the first few weeks of the war, you saw images how people literally were escaping, walking, driving, whatever method they were able to find, many of them empty-handed. Some of them with a carry-on or with a piece of luggage. I ask you a question. We live in Egypt as a free nation. Is the first thing or the last thing that is in your mind? The first thing that is in your mind is, oh, I need to bring the tambourines. Guarantee that no men brought tambourines. But the ladies did bring the tambourines. It's a pasuk in the Perashah. Perashah Beshalach. Sefer Shemot. And the question is, why? Short answer. Because the ladies had greater emunah than men in Egypt and in the desert. In Egypt, we can mention one more. In the beginning of Sefer Shemot, when Paro makes a decree against the Jewish boys, what does he say? A boy is born, get rid of him. The Pasuk tells us the opposite. Ubnei Israel paru. The Jewish people became multiplied. And if you remember the remaining part of the Pasuk, 6 words, all alluding to being fruitful and multiplied. The ladies could have said, we don't want to have children. For what? To be taken by Paro? What the ladies do? They conceive children, they carry them, they give birth to them in the field, as King Solomon writes in Shir HaShirim, the 8th chapter, Tahat tapuach orarticha, Shamma hibelatecha imecha, Shamma hibela yiladatcha. Says the verse in Shlomo HaMelech, Tahat tapuach, under the apple tree, orarticha, you woke up, that means you were born. Shamma, there, hibela yiladatcha, your mother had birth pains and deliver you. It's a pasuk. So what do we see? That the Rambam, Maimonides, is super correct in these matters, that ladies possess a natural level of emunah. Even one more, if we can add, the sin of the golden calf. When a handful of people put Aharon HaKohen against the wall, And what does Aharon Kohen says? Go to your wives and ask them for jewelry. Now, what kind of advice Aharon Kohen gives them? Perhaps Aharon Kohen was aware that the ladies will refuse to give it to them. And therefore he figured the wife will talk some sense into the husband. The wife will talk some sense into the husband. They will refuse to give them the jewelry because they will ask the husbands, what do you want it for? And the ladies will give the husband over the head. How dare you going to go against Aharon? How dare you going to go against Hashem? How dare you going to go against Moshe Rabbeinu? So now we understand what the Rambam writes, that the ladies were blessed with a special gift of having Emunah and Bitachon in Hashem to a certain extent greater than the men. And therefore it says that one of the basic fundamental aspects of Judaism, says the Rambam, is the power of Emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And honestly speaking, if we think for a moment, if we develop this beautiful Emunah that we learn about today, guess what? When the Torah asks me to do something, I will not start debating or thinking, should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? Why should I do it? Who else does it? Those thoughts will definitely disappear from my mind. Why? Because I have something that is not negotiable. My emunah in Borei Olam. Let's see, there is one more message from today's magnificent Sefirah. He adds one more fascinating concept here, that there is a mitzvah from the Torah to teach Torah to their children. Beshinantam levanecha bedibarta bam. Besides that the kids go to the Talmud Torah, to the school, to the yeshiva, but there is a positive commandment of the Torah to teach Torah to our children. And he explains, based on the Sefirah of today, that the reason being for that is because from father to son is a generation apart. I'm my generation, my son is his generation, my grandchildren are their generation. But we are all connected as long as we have the correct connection. And what is this correct connection according to the Sefirah of today? The legacy of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is the essence of the Torah. And that's what the Pasuk writes, Torah tzivalanu Moshe morasha kehilat Yaakov. The Torah that was commanded to us by Moshe Rabbeinu is the inheritance of the congregation of Yaakov. What word did we use? Inheritance. Like parents leave something for their children after 120, some do it during lifetime, but it's important to have some documentation, by the way, to avoid later on situations in life. So we use the same word, inheritance. Yes, there is a mitzvah and there is a concept of sending the children to learn Torah with a teacher, because the teachers become like a surrogate father to a certain extent. But the mitzvah, it's from the parents. because this is how we continue our own legacy. As I said in the past, school supplements the home. The home supplements the school. And when they are more or less both of them in the same sync or wavelength, so then the child gets good messages coming from the home and coming from the school. But if Haz v'Shalom, home is one way and the school is a different way, and when the child finishes school, he goes home to a complete different environment or influence that the school will love to promote for the well-being of the child, it creates in the child obviously a certain level of confusion or a certain level of not knowing which direction to go. And that's why it's imperative that the parenting and education goes hand in hand at all levels, not only to have proper communication, but to make sure that our children can become our eternal legacy. Because this is part of our responsibilities, not only as members of Am Israel, but as guarantors of the Torah. As we are rapidly approaching Shavuot, we remember the magic words that Moshe Rabbeinu offered to Hashem when it came to the giving of the Torah. Banenu arevim ba'adenu. Our children are our cosigners. So the way to do that is by us also investing in our children. Not only providing them a roof over the head and vacation time and paying tuition, but also educating them. And one of the basic ways of education is giving them a positive example, giving them dosages of Emunah in the way that we communicate with them. And sometimes when they act and they say things, this is the opportunity that parents, father and mother, obviously, have a chance to perhaps inject dosages of Emunah. The Baal Shem Tov explains that there are many, many levels of Emunah, but there is one level, basic level, that the parents inject or inserted in the neshama of their children as the children grow up. And the older the child becomes, that eventually becomes bar mitzvah and becomes a teenager and becomes a mature young member in Am Israel, so that enables that fundamental emunah given to him from his childhood years to be able to develop and to grow that emunah, to give him or her the opportunity to flourish and to live in a life surrounded by emunah and bitachon in Hashem, and giving them the tools not only of survival, spiritual survival, but actually the tools to succeed in many, many areas of their life. Tizke mitzvot to the generous sponsors of today's class. Be'ezrat Hashem, I'll be going home soon, and we'll resume the class from the synagogue Beli Neder tomorrow morning. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day. Shalom u'bracha tova.